Okay, fabulous. Okay, so welcome. This is very exciting. My name is Marina Citrin, and I am kind of a part of Colectiva Sembrar and this beautiful book project, Pandemic Solidarity, that we are speaking about today. It's a kind of book launch, but by way of book launch, we're going to do what, so you can see all the contributors. We're going to do what one of the main reasons, one of the main intentions behind putting this book together was, which is to have people in movement around the world in various networks from our different locations talk to one another about what we're doing, to think together about how to deepen these networks, how to make them more connected, learning from one another in a very horizontal way. Before we jump into that, and we have wonderful guests from, kind of guest participants from different regions of the world. Before we jump into that, just a few minutes on the background to the book. And I think a few of us, so this is, we are sponsored, hosted, I don't know, the Zoom is hosted at Binghamton University, and a number of us are in the sociology department there and part of something called the ethnography lab. Others are from the English department and Comp Lit, who also kind of co-sponsored this event, and whatever that also means in the Zoom world of sponsoring an event, circulating it. So each of us is just going to say a few words about kind of how this started. And what I want to say about that is that it started as a conversation. So some of us, the pandemic started in March. We started to talk about what was happening in the world and reflecting on, maybe this is where we go to Shema, because it was talking about, we started to talk about what was happening and what we were being told was happening. So like happens so often, the kind of the stories we're told about ourselves versus what we are actually doing. And so today is a big conversation about what we're actually doing, we kind of collectively in our different networks around the world. But that clash of who we are and what we're told about ourselves and what we're actually doing came up really early on. And it was part of why we decided to put together these stories of what people are actually doing, how we help one another in times of crisis, that it's not that we're each out for ourselves and we're hoarding toilet paper and all of these different things. Those are the stories we're told about ourselves, but who we actually are is beautiful and all about helping one another in a mutual way. So Shema, if you would introduce yourself, and maybe after you do that, would you introduce another one of the kind of initiators from Binghamton, and then we'll go to the global discussion.
I'm Shema. I am a third-year student, PhD student in the Department of Sociology at Binghamton University, and I would like to thank you all for being here, for making this happen. So I am very excited and maybe a little bit nervous, so please bear with me. And we decided, we were just, as Marina told, we were talking in our ethnography graduate seminar about what was happening in March and how we learn about them. And I was especially talking about Turkey, and because I was trying to follow solidarity networks from Turkey. Now they are with us and they will introduce themselves better. And I was trying to follow them from a distance from here and trying to make, to do something because what they were doing was so important, and because official accounts were hiding the official numbers or even existence of the virus in Turkey. So that was the point that we started to talk more with Marina, both personally and also in our class discussions, and then kept talking, and then now here we are. We learned more different stories from each other, and then we wanted to make those connections through this book project, which is a kind of spiral that we have been talking about, outward spiral. So maybe we can talk about that metaphor more. I just would like to call Emre, because I was also learning from him a lot during that process from Rojava. So maybe he can continue and explain us, maybe elaborate further on. Thank you.
Thank you, Shema, and hello everybody. I'm Emre. I'm also from sociology here at Binghamton, and I was part of the ethnography lab process, and I guess, you know, to complement what Shema said on how things came to be, I'd like to add that there was a lot of horizontal reaching out, and it sort of like grew in sort of like a snowball way through organic connections people had, not just in the space of academia, of course, but in the other political work we've been doing and we've done in the past. I mean, I know many people brought others in, and I had the opportunity to be in Rojava, North and East Syria for 6 weeks last summer, and one of the comrades that I met there kindly agreed to come into the project. I invited her, so this organic, I guess, solidarity was there at the inception of the idea, and I and Khabat Abbas, who unfortunately is not able to be here today, but she sends her regards. She's on the road, she's traveling. We were able to write about how the solidarity and relief work took off on the ground in Rojava, and how the different political structure there had sort of like different consequences and different impact on the work of the solidarity networks there. And I guess I would like to ask Debarati, since she was there with us too. And yeah, thank you all for being here today.
Thank you, Emre, and thank you everyone for coming today. And I think very much what Shema and Emre said, and also if you read Marina's introduction, how the book came into what it is now today. So as they both said, that it was very much from the ethnography class, the seminar that we were there. And I was very new to this ethnographic methods or approaches. And what my chapter is very much an example of what I learned in the class and also what I discussed during the meetings that we had. And I would just like to add that it was so much of a learning process for me, both in terms of ethnography and also in terms of what was happening around, particularly in my country, which I was not that aware of. And it was only via the interviews, which were more like informal conversations, that I came to know of what was happening in my country, in my city, or in the state that I come from. Thank you so much for this experience, Marina, and also everyone who's part of Collective Simrar. And I would like to say, Media, will you like to go next?
Hello, everyone. So this is Media. I hold master's degree from Binghamton University, and I graduated last year. And yeah, in comparative literature. So how did I get to do this project? It's also from the communication that we all have. It was via Debaruti. She got me in touch with this whole group of people from different parts of the world to do this book or the chapter. So just like what my colleagues were trying to mention, we are trying to look at the subject in a very horizontal way to learn more about our own people and around the world, how we human from different parts and you know, different backgrounds are trying to react with this pandemic. In my chapter, I covered Iraq. So I covered Kurdistan of Iraq, and I covered the rest parts of Iraq. And it was interesting for me personally because of the different geographical context, also the political context. So it was like from the north the central part and then the southern part of Iraq, and how each area tries to approach the pandemic in a different way. I personally, I enjoyed so much working in this book. And I learned a lot from it, from the group of people that I was working with, and also from my own experience while writing it. So yeah, and thank you guys for coming today and joining us in this event. Yeah, so I think I'll pass on. I don't know whether Joshua is here or Ariel. Do we have more Binghamton people?
So from Taiwan, Jessica, who also graduated from the program, is not here, and Ariella is not able to be here. So I think what we'll do is kind of shift now to people who are, some people from the networks directly who are interviewed or kind of close to, even if they weren't interviewed in the book, kind of part of these processes. And then some of us are both participants in movements and in networks, and we facilitated voices from those places. So we'll be speaking as both, which is, yeah, I think where we're going to go next. And as everyone's been saying, and you'll kind of see each without, we didn't make a plan for the book as far as, okay, which regions of the world are we going to cover? It was very much what everyone's been describing. So Devarati knows Media, who's, you know, located in Kurdish northern Iraq at this moment, and I know Nancy from Argentina, who then connected us with someone else, or I know Vanessa from Brazil, who connected us to Lais, who's, you know, now located in Portugal, to then Raquel in Portugal, who connects us to Boaventura, who wrote about Southern Africa, where he is. And it kind of, so we cover, and if you look at the book, if you haven't read it already, please do, you can get it. You can also contact us and we'll make sure to get you a PDF if you can't get an actual copy of the book, because the idea is to circulate it as much as possible. But that it was through these kind of friendship and political networks that reach globally that the chapters are what they are. We are who we are. So it could have happened in so many other different ways. And what that I think speaks to is how broad and deep the networks of mutual aid are around the globe. So it's not that we say like, okay, let's look at the top 10 locations, but wherever people are, when there is a time of crisis, this is what we do. We help one another. We come together in this way. So speaking to that, maybe should we start with Lais and Raquel? Does that, and then maybe the two of you can introduce or call on kind of the next people region. Does that make sense from the book?
Okay, so Raquel, is it okay if I start and then you talk next? Yeah, just to follow the trajectory. So I was invited by Vanessa, who was invited by Marina, and I invited Raquel, who then invited Boaventura. I had just gotten to Portugal. Vanessa reached out to me because my research interest was also the research interest of the book. I am researching solidarity networks and mutual aid networks. And through the people who I had already been in contact with because of my dissertation research, I had an overwhelming amount of recommendations about Raquel's work and all the wonderful things that she does in Lisbon and Coimbra, and well, yeah, she's a superstar here. So I was really nervous to reach out to her, and you know, like butterflies in my stomach. I was this junior researcher, just anyways. She was lovely and said yes, and then our book was born. Now, I mean, there are a bunch of things that happened in between, but yeah, that's kind of how the whole thing happened. And I learned so much through the process of writing this book. it was beautiful to meet with the collectiva every Saturday and to not feel pressure to perform a certain notion of intellectuality that we are often trained to do when we are in grad school. It felt like this was the real world, and the real world is so much better than the one fantasized in competitive grad school seminars. So I have so many thanks to give to all of you for honestly like making me believe again that I had a space in the academic and activist world that wasn't toxic, that was beautiful and kind and necessary. You know? So thank all of you for being here and all of you for giving me a chance to write and think with you. Raquel?
Thank you, Lais, and thank you so much. You're so sweet. Thank you for for being having this energy, this beautiful and positive energy. It was my first time writing a chapter with someone, and it's a very intimate process. And with Lais, it was really like natural and organic, and it flowed very well. So I'm Raquel. I'm a third-year PhD student, also in Coimbra, in post-colonialisms and global citizenship. But my thesis is on autotour and slavery. It's not directly on solidarity, but I make part of the anti-racist nucleus of Coimbra, which is an activist group to welcome and denounce situations of racism. And we basically organized the campaign during the first curfew called Anti-Racist Campaign for Immediate Support. And it was articulated with the Roma communities and Black communities. So that's why Lais contacted me, because she knew about the campaign. And finally, I ended up writing the chapter with her. And what I found brilliant about this process, that I could never participate completely during the process, but is the way it was organized in a very horizontal and outside academia, which is something that interests me a lot, which is these possibilities of working with collectives that are grassroots organization and that can inform us in a very genuine and honest way. So I will thank all the activists that were able to answer for this chapter, even being so busy doing their different initiatives. And thank you all for having me here also. I would like to call Boaventura, but he's not here. So who's missing? Nancy Pinheiro. I don't know if you can go now.
Hi, hello everyone. Thanks for being here, for your time, for your screen time, which is something we're having too much of. So we really appreciate you being here. I'm Nancy from Argentina. I co-authored the Argentina chapter with Liz, compañera who could not be here with us today. I am an activist translator, an activist and professional translator, and I've always been collaborating with different networks, communicating the struggles between the global North and the global South, and English and Spanish, and mostly, yes, contributing, being an ally to different organizations. So when Magali, another compañera, contacted me for this, I was stuck in New York. I traveled there for work, and then I ended up staying 4 months. So being in contact with those networks I had built along the years allowed me to have a much better stay there. I could count on a lot of people, and that's how I came to know about this project and participate. And it was, I felt very impotent to not being able to be part of mutual aid groups in my own country with my own people, and to not be out in the streets, because sometimes or most of the times in Argentina, our reaction and our tool is to take to the streets. So even during a pandemic, right, as we saw in the United States, a lot of people had to struggle to survive, and they also had other issues that were as important as that particular virus. There are a lot of viruses going around, and so mobilizing and taking to the streets was not possible for me. And I was like, what, I need to do something. And this project was a learning process and an opportunity also to listen. I think that as part of the humanities world, maybe we're more used to reading and than listening, whether you call it ethnographic work or not. For me, we need to listen to what people are doing right now and how they're experiencing these mutual aid efforts all over the world. So this is a huge opportunity, and it's about internationalism, which is, I think, a word that needs to be recovered. So I'm very grateful to be here and be able to keep learning from all of you. I don't know who else, Carla?
Hello, thanks for having us be in your space and joining us. I'm calling in from the occupied and ancestral lands of the Squamish, Musculum, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, also known as Vancouver, Canada. I always love talking about mutual aid, so I'm delighted to be here to hear and learn more and listen, as Nancy said. I was invited by Marina to do a chapter on Canada, and for me, mutual aid lives beyond borders, and so I pitched back that we do Turtle Island, and Marina immediately grabbed onto that, thankfully, and so Turtle Island being Canada, US, and Mexico, and I co-authored this chapter with a few people, but primarily with Magali. I'm gonna butcher her last name if someone can say it for me. I have a speech impediment. I have a really difficult time with names I don't know, and especially with lots of vowels, so I apologize. And it was just this, similar to Nancy, I've been organizing with mutual aid networks for the past 2 decades, and I have a compromised immune system, so I was unable to be out there. I did one of the mutual aid documents, Google Docs, that everyone was doing for my city, but I felt a bit lost, and this was like I think Nancy even called it a life jacket for us all to be on this collective. As a collective, we were also engaging in a deep level of mutual aid and solidarity and care, those Saturday meetings. And it was just beautiful, and I'm excited to hear from all the networks and where you're at. I want to really thank the people who said yes to me. We did turn this book around in, I think, 6 weeks or something. And that folks, I mean, the pandemic, no one's absolved. We're all in this, right? But we're, as Marina said, we're in different boats. And it's changing our lives fast and drastically. And to have friends and friends of friends say yes to me so immediately and take the time to let us interview, I'm just so deeply grateful. I think, have we covered everyone that's in the collective? Because I think because this takes place on Turtle Island, originally from Binghamton University, I'd really like to turn this over to my friend and comrade Clee Benelli, because he was one of the first people. This is why I did Turtle Island, because I was like, I need Clee to talk about the intersection of mutual aid and colonialism, and or mutual aid and decolonialism or anti-colonial movements. And if it's okay with everybody, and it's all right with you, Clee, I'd like to pass it on to you to maybe talk about what you've done since the pandemic, how it's changed, what you're facing now, and invite you to cross-pollinate with the other people in the group.
Yeah, hiate do hehe she clee dashijine torichini shabashish china kudine dashinella shema e beithachi auto beithachi dashiche kui jithiji den asha auto kinfanish. My name is Cleben Ali. I'm originally from Black Mesa on the Diné or Navajo Nation here in the what is known as the occupied southwest of the so-called United States. I've been organizing since March with Kinflena Mutual Aid, which is really just an all-volunteer community response to COVID-19, focused on direct action, autonomous organizing, and the principles of mutual aid and solidarity. We've been really active in the region. And in April, I helped to start a network called Indigenous Mutual Aid, which primarily is a directory, also resource distribution. We've been doing an emergency fund specifically for Indigenous mutual aid projects on the ground in their communities because of the disproportionate impacts that we face through colonial violence and violence against the land that has made our people more susceptible through resource extractive industries and so forth. And so we've been really on the front lines since the beginning of the widespread pandemic in our lands to make sure that those most vulnerable in our communities, our elderly, medicine practitioners, as well as unsheltered folks, have the support that they need. And I also want to say that just grateful for the extension to participate in the project, to offer an anti-colonial perspective in the work that we're doing on the ground, because this is years of work that we've been doing before this pandemic. And this crisis, of course, as many of you know, has been compounded, has compounded other crises that we continue to face in our communities. So this has been sort of a natural extension on some levels of the work that we've been doing to build our autonomy and restore indigenous lifeways, food sovereignty, and so forth for our communities. And I also just want to just recognize and thank everybody for the work that you're doing, and acknowledge the opportunities for solidarity and expanding all of our networks to ensure that we're finding creative ways to link up, support each other, and also to work, strategize, and figure out effective ways to bring the system down at the same time. So, and thank you for the opportunity to be here and to present.
Some of the networks in Turkey, and then kind of go back maybe to Portugal, and then maybe from there, should we begin to ask questions of one another and have it as a real dialogue? So one another being the people who are a part of different networks of mutual aid. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm. Would you like to start, Jemre or Yusuf? Maybe how first we got organized and March.
Hi everyone, I'm Cemre from Turkey. We in Kadıköy we organized a solidarity network. It was really quick and we had lots of experiences, just like you. In Kadıköy, actually, we know each other from various political groups. And when the first positive cases are announced by the government, as the first reflex, we got together and organized the Solidarity Network. We reached 250 volunteers and have months with mutual aid work. We had gained many friendship, and we're still going on actually. But nowadays we're talking about how to go on, because the problems are growing actually in Turkey. And by the way, it was a chance for us also to be a part of this book, with our telling our experiences for this book. It was a chance for us to meet you also and hear the stories from all over the world. Thank you for that, and thank you for this program also that you invited us. Thank you for being here. That's all. Thanks. Yusuf, would you like to go on?
Yeah, of course. Hello all. Can you hear me? Yeah, thank you. First of all, greetings from Beşiktaş, Istanbul. It's from Turkey. I'm very glad to meet you, the comrades from all over the world. I'm gonna try to explain. I'm sorry, I think I have a problem with my headphone. Just a minute. Oh, sorry. Hello? Yeah, is it okay? Okay. So I'm gonna try to explain what we are doing now and what is our difficulties when we work mutual aid. Actually, Cemre began with, and we are neighbor provinces. We are from neighbor provinces. I'm from Beşiktaş Solidarity Network, and the first was Kadıköy Solidarity Network. So they are our leaders. So we were talking about what we can do to have a mutual aid organization, and when we heard about Kadıköy, we just announced Beşiktaş Solidarity Network and we began. So it was very fast, and the network grow bigger in very fast. But now nowadays hundreds of people die day by day, but it's not we don't have the same situation on our works because I think after normalization on all over the world, it gets difficult for us to continue it because people and working class should begin to go their works and to include the crowds, to work in crowds. So it's not our first case in nowadays. And in Turkey there is a economical crisis, and it is so hard to the people. So I don't think it is now the first case for people and for us. We can't say it is coronavirus or the pandemic. So today we should to handle the economical crisis, and we should make mutual aid programs on them. So we are trying to do it, but it's not the same as beginning. But so we are working on them. I don't know, is it okay? But if there is any question, I'm gonna try to explain it. Thank you. Yeah.
Wonder. Maybe I'll start with one question, just kind of by way of example. Something we didn't do intentionally, but I think is interesting. The people kind of collaborating together were mostly women, people who identified as women, putting together the book. And then we found also in speaking to people that so much of that care work is being done in different places by women or initiated by women. And so I wonder if that's something in different parts of the world that was noticed, whether that's women, whether it's women of color from different backgrounds, depending where you're located in the world, if that's something people noticed or could reflect on in the different locations where we are.
May I talk? Yes, I agree with you about that, because during this pandemic and in the experiences that we have in our solidarity networks, we saw a situation like this. Most of the people are women, young women, older women, but I felt like this mutual aid work is like having the responsibility of your neighbor, having the responsibility of whole the society. It's a normal thing actually for women-owned world, but and also I think it's about this thing. Women nowadays, in years actually, women are having being the part in front of this struggle movements. Actually, I think it's about that also. That's my opinion.
Yeah, can I also add on, even though I'm not a contributor to the book?
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
So yes, for sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess this is the first time using it. So I think that at least what I've experienced in Boston, at least just even looking at, you know, the traditional immigrant neighborhoods of East Boston, and even just like looking at, you know, women in society as a whole, it's like, you know, what she had said before, that a lot of the care networks, the burden of emotional labor is also distributed to women, so that, you know, maybe mutual aid labor is feminized, because, you know, a lot of it also for, like, you know, obviously mutual aid is not just, you know, the distribution of resources and so on. It's also, you know, the distribution, like it also involves like the emotional checkups on like various different people within the care network, and also knowing which resources to assign to what person, which inherently is sort of a form of like, you know, care. So I think that's why, you know, many of the people in mutual aid networks are women or identified as women.
As one of the facilitators, I also wanted to invite anyone who's on the panel or whatever we're doing here to bring up your own questions and curiosity at any time.
I do have another question. I don't know. that came up in a discussion with our friends from Turkey the other day, who were talking about how, I'm not going to speak for you, but kind of that the government in Turkey, the state is starting to, or has been repressing the mutual aid networks. And I wonder if that's also true, say, in Argentina or parts of Turtle Island or in Portugal, or other people who are joining us from different places. I mean, Rojava is a unique experience. We might ask also for the different perspective, or in Iraq, like how much is that taking place? What does that look like? Why? How are people managing it?
Our comrades from Turkey, what were some of the ways in which, you know, while you were doing solidarity work, especially at the, you know, time of the research and the book, which was written like in the spring, what were some of the interactions you may have had with state institutions or security forces? Were they neutral, positive, negative in terms of their impact?
Cemre, do you want to begin or? Okay. Actually, the state wasn't able to control the pandemic, but I tried to explain in Monday they wasn't able, but they want to block us too, because they didn't want if opposition trying to make solidarity, trying to organize mutual aids, because if when we are making this work, the state was so we show the state's weaknesses. So because of it, they try to not just the solidarity block, not just the solidarity networks. They try to block the municipalities, the opposition's municipalities, and the other opposition's organizations. So when they aren't able to do it, and when they block us, they couldn't reach their gain, because people need to make their own solidarity, because they don't have a state who help them, and we learned that in this process, the state or the capitalism isn't able to solve any problem of us. So we try to find some way to break this block, and I think we make some of it.
Maybe I can add some thoughts about it. Actually, I think the state tried to do this, but it couldn't find that power to do this, because they know, all the people knows that they're not rightful, but we were not rightful. So they couldn't have that power to control us too much, because we were so rightful, but they're still threatening on all the unions, for example, doctors' unions. They're all against to who are telling the truth, giving the right information about pandemic or workers' situations. they're against and they're threatening all the unions and all the groups like this.
Maybe I would like you to further elaborate on the thing that you said, Jemre. You said they can't control us, right? Because maybe can you please a little bit elaborate on that, how you feel about that feeling, or like getting maybe stronger together? Would you like to?
Of course, it's a great feeling because for 10 years, I'm a member of a socialist movement in Turkey. And sometimes I'm feeling like this, looking at my life, at my last 10 years. It's full of resistances and struggles and massacres also. We lived lots of things. And I'm saying that all of these things about freedom. I don't want to be free. I want to be freedom itself. And I think when people get in this solidarity and struggle movements, people feel these things. They have all the things. The state has lots of things, guns, all the power of the state, and we have just ourselves, our solidarity, our labor, I don't know, and humanity, but not like this. The humanity is like, it's about how can I say, to change the world. It's about to change the world, actually. And these feelings are so complicated and so beautiful, I think.
I think what Shemre, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name correctly, was saying about feeling and what it feels like for people to participate in these networks. That is, for me, very interesting to see in the book how we have both countries that have strong pre-existing networks, like Argentina, Turkey, also talk about networks that have been going on for years, and some other experiences. Well, Clee also mentioned, you know, of course, like colonialism, and the chapter in Portugal, it's like they talk about how the idea of solidarity as a horizontal thing has been recovered and connected to the anti-colonial struggle. So there are these pre-existing networks, but also new networks, right? People who for the first time are discovering solidarity and are learning, because I feel that sometimes we from the movements tend or can get a little bit rigid in terms of what mutual aid is and what mutual aid isn't. And I think that on the one hand, it's important to talk about that, like it's not charity, or we believe it's not vertical charity. But also, I think it's super interesting to see in the book that people who approach it for the first time, they engage in a process of discovery. Like, and I sort of, it feels like this mutual aid is a sort of mutual recognition, right? We are all oppressed by more or less the same powers, even if we don't know each other, even if we're not friends. So I think that's very interesting, and perhaps people can comment on how many new people have approached you, how do people react to this unprecedented times, asking for help or giving help, or
Maybe I'd like to say something about the question Nancy just said, because what I found out more or less in the middle of the campaign is that the state was asking for help, because we were creating the data, we were creating ways of denouncing its absent. So as far as I'm concerned, the mayor, and then we have Junta de Freguesia, which is below the mayor in Coimbra, they start contacting us to understand how many families were in need, if we could give some details, etc. So in one hand, this virus is centralized the state as an important factor, but on the other hand, we know that it is not able to perform its function. And even more when we are talking about racialized or marginalized groups. And I think you can see that in a very simple way when we think about, for instance, police brutality, where the state during the pandemic became even more repressive. And we had a lot of situations here in some neighborhoods where the police was entering in a very violent way, which is something that is happening for years, but it became more visible now. And also the state proposed a strategy of treatment that consisted on, to combat the virus, that it consisted in isolation, testing, and treatment. And we know that some Roma communities didn't have that following up. So they were already like entire neighborhoods with a lot of infected Roma people that the state was not controlling. Also, the wage substitution that the state suggested and social security were not able to, for people that don't have declared work. So there you have a huge part of the society that is working illegally also, not to say the people that work outside that cannot be isolated, like the Roma markets, even cleaning women, etc. So what I found in the end is that the state needs us more than we need the state, and yeah, and basically we in the end up thinking that besides giving resources, it is also important to denounce this absence. It is also important to request data of racial and ethnical data. So we are now more working on this kind of reports so we can contest concrete measures in terms of state policies and public policies.
Go ahead, Clee.
Yeah, I just wanted to address a couple of things. One, you know, the question about like gendered mutual aid and so forth. For Diné folks or Navajo, our culture is matriarchal. And so I think there's like an extension of that in the response. Although if you look at the range of mutual aid groups that have stepped up, and there's at least 15 like distinct groups that are operating, probably more scattered throughout just our reservation lands alone. It's very diverse on a gender basis, including trans, like indigenous folks who have stepped up to organize. There is one group called the Navahopi COVID-19 Family Relief Fund that was very effective initially in fundraising. They raised over $5 million, very efficient and effective. And I was initially part of this organization. I've since stepped away from it, mainly because it became too much of an NGO, like nonprofit in its orientation, but it still does very effective work. But the whole group, I was just basically the sort of outsider because it was all indigenous femme folks. And the situation though is that the Navajo Nation is very particular because we're talking about state repression. The Navajo Tribal Council actually imposed a very severe lockdown and restricted relief efforts from doing distribution. They wouldn't give exemptions for us as essential workers. So we could not do any kind of distribution on the days that they did the severe lockdowns under threat of arrest or fines. And so that was actually coming from our tribal council, not from the colonial states, but this sort of colonial proxy apparatus, which is the tribal councils. And it got to the point where the Navajo Nation the official tribal councils were actually intervening with resource distributions and actually commandeering whole truckloads of PPE or protective equipment and other resources. And so we had many examples from a range of different support groups that were actually having the resources that were intended for their distributions taken by those authorities and then sent elsewhere. And so there's a range of breakdowns, but I think one comment I'd like to make is that the state in many ways, with some of the narratives that we experienced and we were shared from other groups that we are organizing with, was more than happy to offload some of these services in the work. But in many ways, we sort of embrace that as a way to sort of undermine the legitimacy of the state and demonstrate that we are building our power. We can take care of each other in our communities, and we don't need the state interference. You know, of course, there was a threat, especially as was mentioned, the escalation of state violence after the George Floyd uprisings, particularly, and in the context of the so-called U.S., we are also dealing with the vilification of anti-fascist organizing. I mean, a lot of us are like, you know, mutual aid by day and anti-fascist by night, you know, and so a lot of us are caught up in that as well. A lot of the folks in our networks, in our organization. So we're sort of like dealing with a range of layers of state repression in this new political environment, especially in the escalation building up towards the elections. We are seeing a lot more of that. In some of the communities where there were more flare-ups of resistance with, you know, the support of the in solidarity of Black Lives Matter movement, we saw a lot more targeted repression impacting these networks because they were serving sort of dual purposes, providing support for those most vulnerable in our communities, but also those in the front lines of these struggles and helping to sustain resistances and the street battles that we are facing on a nearly daily basis.
It's great to hear these different takes on state response to both the pandemic itself and the solidarity responses to the pandemic. And I would like to, you know, echo what Yusuf had said earlier and try to build upon it. And I think in majority of the world, we observe and receive this kind of state repression and aggression to organizing it, especially in moments of crises like these that expose the state's inability to address the situation well. And I think this is, well, at the one main fundamental reason for this is the centralist organization of these states, which is unable to act, which is despite all the surveillance measures and all the money spent into, researching and controlling the population, it's unable to know the specific needs of different, communities, and a more decentralized approach to not only moments of crisis, I guess, but to political organizing in general can be productive. And I would argue Rojava presents us with the glimpse of, of our decentralized response to not only pandemics, but to, organizing different aspects of daily life can be made. It's still an ongoing process, but through the commune and council, four-layered commune and council system, power is somewhat decentralized, and an area where close to 4 million people live. These 4,000 something communes and hundreds of councils and cooperatives are structurally linked to decision-making processes to municipalities, to local governments, and it has been relatively more efficient in terms of identifying the specific needs of millions of people and delivering mutual aid and assistance relatively more efficient.
We have a question in the chat. Does somebody want to read it?
Go ahead. Do you want to? I'll read. I mean, I can read it. Can you hear me? No. I'm sorry. It's just. I wanted to just add on to something Emre just said about the book process as a whole. Well, like 3 little things. But one big one, I mean, there were so many things that were so difficult. Yes, they're beautiful, like pink, we decided. Movement participant also designed the cover, or she allowed us to use it. We had a lot of hard things to decide in a really short amount of time. One of them, well, maybe this one was less difficult, which is, we start the book with Rojava. And that was intentional in thinking about, rather than starting and then kind of ending the book with, and look what could be possible, not as the utopia, but as a much more participatory, decentralized, non-state state. So for people who aren't familiar, kind of a bit more like, say, the Zapatistas in Chiapas. Different, but there's similarities. So starting with that to begin with really broad what is possible. And I'll read the question in a minute because I think it's getting, bringing out some of that question about global solidarity. 2 things that I want to say to not forget, because we struggled a lot with this and we want to recognize as a group, the Colectiva Sembrar, putting the book together, that English is the vast minority language and putting together the book around the world in this space, I think, and acknowledging the history of colonialism with that, the power that comes out with that, in translating. So the vast majority of the chapters were done in other languages. So think of the work everyone was doing as far as the interviews, speaking with people, then translating it. And translation, Nancy, you can speak to this so much. You wrote that part of the introduction, how complicated it is to translate when there are all of these levels of power. So I at least want to recognize that now and recognize that in this space. And I appreciate that everyone has agreed as much as possible to be speaking here in English and all of what that implies. We also, and this was Raquel especially bringing this out in the discussion, organizing the book around regions and nation states, when without really knowing each other, many of us, most of us, we're not big fans of the nation state. So why would we organize a book around regions was another big problem. And it was largely because of time that we, were having trouble imagining how we would do this thematically, right? Oh, good, I'm getting nods. So this is like, but it could have been done and maybe should have been done in so many other different ways. So this is just one of many ways to imagine it, but imagining along the lines of nation states is deeply problematic. And we all see that borders also. So kind of then tied to that, I'm going to raise this question raise the question that was, unless someone else wants to read it. Okay, so one, please asking that people put in the links to your mutual aid efforts. I know our friends from Turkey have been asking for this as well. So the more people who can put into the chat, these links, that would be great. And then the question, let's see, to the participants. What can the ways to organize these solidarity movements be? The book, I think, is very good, solid example for that. Do you think that we can and should organize a worldwide network which can be as effective as the anti-fascist movements, the BDS movements, etc.? So yeah, that I think thinking, that's some of the idea in this, like, let's talk to one another. What could that look like without the borders?
I don't have the answer for that question, but I think it's really an interesting one because it makes us again rethink about the layers that we are formed, like the geography, the borders, the power of the state, and then, you know, the layers that we have in our societies. It just like the question makes me rethink again. So what to prevent us from making, like, you know, a whole network all around the world, and then rethinking about the structure of our societies. So I really don't have answers for that, but it makes me rethink about that, especially that, just like what was Emre saying, and I think, I mean, most of the projects that were dealt with during the pandemic, most of them were decentralized. They were done by normal people that didn't ask for the support of the state, rather than just leave us alone, we're gonna do our work. So it is interesting that how those movements are so much decentralized at some point, and at the same time, it still have some other layers that prevent it to get in touch with their other fellow human from different regions. So yeah, so thank you for that interesting question.
I think, yes, that's like the $100 question. And I don't know, I'm a bit afraid of these global worldwide networks, because I think it's very important also to understand what is the determinant factor that moves us. If it's race, if it's gender, if it's class, if it's whatever, and then work from that there. And I think that the working local, thinking global issue paradigm makes sense, because we cannot extrapolate to territories that we don't know. The other day they asked me about indigenous alliances with Black people. I cannot talk about it. I have no idea what is happening with indigenous populations. So what I found really risky on movements like anti-fascist global movements is that, is it fascism recognizing the relation with colonialism, the relation with race and capitalism, the relation with all the different factors that came before, even before fascism was formulated as a concept? So I believe that we have to find what moves us. We have to find like what is determinant for us and work from there. And of course, making alliances like with Roma, like we did. And even if it's the mental health issue, like we also interviewed a project that was concerned on giving mental assistance during the pandemic. So I don't know, I think it's more about like a determinant factor. Maybe it can help.
Go ahead, Clee.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond by saying, I think like there are practical realities that are important to like sort of globalize solidarity. You know, I think that sometimes we become over-focused in extending and building and maintaining these networks when our capacities are very limited, and sometimes we're just stuck right in the you know, our noses are on the front line, right on the ground. What I'm really interested in is like sort of proliferating and stabilizing mutual aid networks in ways that, and this is part of what we've been doing with Indigenous mutual aid, is to ensure that we have are sort of localized, are regionalized, and then a broader connection so we can provide support and ensure that as infrastructure, you know, potentially fails, or the interventions regarding infrastructure issues they're, you know, adapt to face the range of challenges, that we can still support each other. So I think like those networks are really key. And on an international level, we can look at different, you know, ways to support each other, whether it is through access solidarity to make sure that we're not standing alone, whether it's sharing best practices and resources, whether it's sharing specific analysis. that can help sort of further and improve like our approaches to intersectionality. I think those are key. But one component I think is like this sort of idea or concept of mutual defense being a component of mutual aid as well, and looking at ways that we can support and also proliferate the attacks to destabilize these global like neoliberal infrastructures that are oppressing our communities, because some of the corporations that are fucking up our lands and poisoning our air, our water, and our bodies are based in some of these other countries. And so I think like proliferating attacks on those kinds of infrastructures or interventions on whatever level is a key component, because as long as, you know, capitalism, as long as colonialism is globalized, then so should be our struggles on some levels to make sure that we are connected enough to like, you know, adapt, develop, and be really dynamic and creative with our strategies. So I look forward to like connecting, because we get a lot of inspiration from the folks in Rojava, as well. And we've been following what's been happening, though we haven't had a direct connection. And the same way with our relatives in Palestine, the same way with our relatives in Chiapas, you know, the same way with our relatives in so-called Canada, who are shutting down pipelines, who are intervening in resource extractive industries. Like we provide whatever support we can on a spiritual and on a practical or material level as well. So I think finding those ways is key, being dynamic, but also being real with what our capacities are, not overextending ourselves, because sometimes we become too idealistic in that, and we need to be brought down right to the ground. And sometimes we also just, you know, can't focus on the bigger, you know, sort of pictures and bigger struggles, because what's happening is such a crisis and hyper-focused area. But I do want to say one more thing before I wrap my response up, is that as the Navajo Nation, and many folks are aware globally, that we became one of the critical hotspots for COVID-19 in the US. We had the most cases per capita, more than any US state, which was very extreme. But we got international support and solidarity. Folks from struggles in Ireland had connected their history when Indigenous folks provided solidarity during their struggles, and they sent mutual aid and support. So that was powerful. Our people celebrated that, and that is part of now the narrative fabric of our struggles and our movements in resistance, not only to COVID-19, but in looking at ways that we are sort of building out movements and support in each other. So I just want to state that as one example of the powerful testimony of global solidarity.
I just wanted to mention that when we talk about the state, even if it's true, I think that we all agree on what it represents and the oppressive and repressive capacities of the state, and to build beyond it. In countries like Argentina, unions and union organizing, which is part of the state, it's super powerful. A lot of people who are part of unions are also part of organized mutual aid efforts. So the relationships are often very complex with the state. And I think it's important to recognize that as an organization, you can, and you need sometimes the state's resources. You have to decide whether you use them to build more autonomy or to keep depending on the state forever. And that's a discussion that happens in a lot of grassroots organizations here in Argentina. And our social movements like negotiate with the state, they're in constant discussion with the state. But when it comes to mutual aid, it also happens that people come together because, for example, they belong to the same union. We interviewed a teachers union, and they were using the food packages that they received from the state to be able to reach out to the families of the school and keep providing support to the families. But they went beyond that and formed an amazing network. So I think that it's difficult sometimes, and it depends on the context, but sometimes it's difficult to talk outside the state. Sometimes it's with people who recognize themselves as belonging, as being part of the state. as teachers from public schools. So there's a nuance there, I think.
I also want to bring attention, there were a few questions before you go to Roberto, if it's okay. There were a few questions in the chat and they're kind of linked. And then Dean Spade, who's with us, who recently did a fabulous book about mutual aid, linking to some of these, many of the ideas that have been brought up. Maybe, I don't know, can I put you on the spot, Dean, if you'd be willing to speak for a minute as well about the project you're involved in, but you posted a link that has groups in the what is the US in Turtle Island, and there have been a few questions about what are some groups, how to get involved, kind of a very like, how does it start? How do you start a mutual aid network? And then for the hyper local, if you're located on Onondaga land, which is the Binghamton area, there are at least 2 mutual aid networks here. So I don't know if anyone is in this space, this Zoom, who's involved. Okay, Dean is posting more things. I don't know if you want to jump in, but Roberto, you wanted to, I'm looking, it says iPhone Roberto, and I don't think your name is iPhone. It's probably more like.
Yeah, no, it's, can you, I'm trying to get that off. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm from Tulsa, Oklahoma, part of a group called Cooperation Tulsa. And there are half a dozen mutual aid groups in the city. Some of them are more like charities. Some of them are all online. And one of the things that we're trying to do is to call for a citywide network of mutual aid groups. And it's been hard to getting it off the ground. We've had a couple of meetings, well, about 4 meetings, and so far only in 2 meetings have people showed up. But I also wanted to mention that Corporation Tulsa is part of an international network, actually, called Symbiosis. I don't know if people have heard of that, but it's it has groups in Canada, like Montreal, and also in Mexico, in Chiron, the city in southern Mexico that kicked out all of the politicians and the police and became autonomous using democracy. So, and we're also having a group in Africa that's wanting to join, because what I see is that this of group, this idea is spreading around the world because it just makes, a lot of it is because it's based on values that are very, you want to shut that off? Anyway, we, in the group Symbiosis, which is a national network, it's not an organization, it's a network. Our points of unity include indigenous values, because indigenous values are very similar to what they call communalist values, and both very opposing capitalist values. In fact, I do a seminar called Indigenous Values versus Capitalist Values, because it's very clear that capitalism is not concerned with things like mutual aid at all. It's very based on individualistic competition and just serving the elites. So as an indigenous person myself, Tulsa is located on the Muskogee Creek Reservation, which just recently got allowed to be called a reservation by the McGirt decision. Native people, we've always lived with direct democracy. We've always lived with councils, which are the same as assemblies. And these ideas around the world are looking at that, looking at indigenous values. And like in Mexico, the Japacitas are obviously operating on indigenous values. The people in Rojava are also operating on their indigenous values, because the Kurdish people were indigenous to that area. So but the main thing is that these values are definitely opposed to capitalist values. And I think that's what all of us, at least I assume all of us, are against capitalist values. The primary example of that is Trump himself, extraordinarily capitalist in the way he thinks and his values. But anyway, as we're trying to get our group together as a citywide group, hopefully to set an example to also set up citywide mutual aid groups and to dialogue with, you know, what we can do. One of the things I've noticed is that groups like Food Not Bombs in our city, they call themselves autonomous, and but they just serve homeless people, but they don't really get homeless people involved in their group. They don't have educational projects so that homeless people can raise their consciousness. So it's sort of like leftist charity, even though they would deny that, because you can't just serve people. It has to be both sides. There has to be reciprocity, and I don't see that in that particular group, because reciprocity means that you don't just give people things, you also expect something in return, like for them to help you, help everybody, and also to do things like raise consciousness, because homeless people can do a lot, but they also have to have their consciousness raised, because they too are infected with capitalist values. Like everybody all over the world more or less is raised under capitalist values, because we live under a worldwide capitalist. So anyway, I wanted to let people know what we're doing here in Tulsa. We're all,
would you be able to put the link into the chat of the groups, the networks in Tulsa, and then maybe Symbiosis as well? That would be great.
Sure. Okay.
As we're starting to wind down, two things are happening. One, we're getting a whole bunch of people in who want to come in and kind of like Zoom bomb or whatever that's called, which is like not going to happen. So what I'm thinking, if people are good with this, so however many faces, we kind of just do a kind of like nodding if that seems right. If Dean, maybe if you're okay speaking a few minutes about the project and the book that you've worked on, and then if maybe everyone in the different networks that have been participating could have a final word, question, share of some kind. And then we just see this as part one of many conversations, right? So yeah. Oh, Carla, yeah.
I just wanted to add real quickly that we do have a website that we could use as a spot to put all this information for folks. So if you want to be in touch with us, we have an email, which I don't know what it is right now.
But if you go to the website, pandemicsolidarity.net, I'm a terrible multitasker, so chatting and like talking with my fingers is not a, unless it's this way. Okay, sorry.
God, I mean, thank you so much for putting on this event and for making this beautiful book. All the themes you guys have been talking about are just like the hard questions, and it's so cool to hear this conversation from people in so many places. I'm really grateful for it. I've recently put out this book about mutual aid, and one of the main responses, the main critical response that I'm getting is like, obviously some of the themes that Roberto was just talking about that are really important about like the ways that charity dynamics can come into mutual aid, and that we're all always hopefully engaged in self-critical processes around that, and that's not surprising that in the culture that we're in. People out of New York only is the place where I hear the most like mutual aid projects as gentrification element, which I never hear from anyone except people in New York. It's kind of an interesting one. Like, what is going on with New York housing that has produced whole takeovers of neighborhoods in New York by gentrifiers, and then when those people do mutual aid, it's not inclusive to all people who've lived there for longer. That's an interesting kind of dynamic. And then the third piece that I heard Clee talking about and others is this piece around the relationship to the state. And like, I'm getting a big critique from like liberals, in my opinion, about like does this mean we're giving up on the state giving us all the stuff? And of course, for me, it's like, well, how long are you going to wait for that? It hasn't happened, you know, like they don't give out the stuff in a way that's not colonial and racist and moralizing. And if they give anything out, and there's no signs on the horizon that governments that I'm perceiving are about to meet the crises that we're living in. But it's really, these questions are really live. And anyway, I'm just really grateful for this book and for this event. And I know it's a huge labor of love to put together any kind of anthology. It's so much herding cats and bringing people all to the same page. And I loved being at this event and hearing how deep the collaboration was for people and how much they got out of the collaborative process, which I just think speaks to people's skills about working together. And I'm just really, really moved by it. So thanks for having this event.
So is everyone okay? Kind of we do a closing of this moment, but we will continue conversations. Yeah. Whoever wants to go. It can even just be a word or a thought or a gesture or whatever. I am so grateful for all of this process and sharing this space today.
I'm so thankful for this program, and I want to say solidarity is a revolutionary thing. That's what I think.
I believe conversations like these are key for building that, you know, international solidarity against rising, internationalizing right-wing populism, and I'm looking forward to further similar conversations.
I want to thank you all and for participating in our program and also accepting to give in interviews to make these things possible. So thank you everyone, and I'm very glad to be here and to expand it further. And I just wanted to say one more thing and thank to my friends in Turkey, comrades in Turkey also. They're now translating the book into Turkish with their collaborative efforts. Everyone who participates in the translation process also does it like voluntarily. So I would like to thank them as well and for helping us to make it happen. Thank you.
Can I say something more? I thank all of you, and I'm very glad to know you, and I'm very glad to meet you. And I think this is a process, social relationships change in a process, so the neighborhood committees or solidarity networks or all networks is change our lives, and solidarity and struggle and resistance feed each other. So when we grow the solidarity, resistance will grow bigger. So when we grow the resistance, the solidarity will grow bigger. So we need, we don't need just solidarity, but also we need resistance. We need to get bigger the struggle, and we need international solidarity, and we need to know each other. So thank you, and greetings from Istanbul again. Good night.
Yeah, I also want to say a big thank you to everyone for coming today. And just like Yusuf, you were saying, I just want to add to what you said. Like moving forward, we can have, because we already know that we are trying to expand our website, and we welcome you all to be a part of that process. And also, we would be very much interested if you would like to add to the conversation, say, for instance, how the conversation itself is shifting or how we are approaching solidarity now as compared to when we started. So maybe that could be a good way, like how far we have come. And also, of course, we talked about regions and borders, but is there any movement towards coming together, or is there still that whatever we call it, a separation or that borders, anything that adds to this conversation would be great.
Okay, I go. Thank you guys for being here. Yes, I think we need more talk like this. I think we need like 3 hours of meeting. And Nancy, for instance, she brought a lot of nuances that are very interesting to discuss. And also agreeing with Emre, maybe yes, this is a way of trying to create something more internationally viable. But also agreeing with Klee, we need self-care, and we need to understand that we cannot be in several fights. So I hope you take care of yourselves and be focused on what you're doing. It's very inspiring.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Raquel. I think this also kind of represents the two sides that I insist on that in the book, the pre-existing networks and new networks, solid friendships, like friendship as a political tool, long-standing friendships, and also being open to new friendships. Having difficult conversations, I think that's important, and being patient and listening. So I'm very grateful for you all, and it's a process. It's an endless process. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to connect, to present. Just wanted to shout out to Dean for the awesome book. I've been meaning to send you an email, just my review as well. And for pandemic solidarity, I think like these conversations are happening in many different spaces. And I think the more that we do that, the more that we generate like and capture the imagination of folks and excite them and inspire and celebrate. So I just want to share some energy and extend my prayers and support, especially for those of you on the front line who have been dealing with this, not just for the past 9 months, but maybe much longer in your lives, and committed yourself to these movements and this work. It's very hard work. It takes a lot of energy. And this is from our perspective as Indigenous folks, we have our prophecies, and this is part of a spiritual war. And we look at this time of renewal as an important time to strengthen ourselves in different ways. And so I just wanted to extend that strength, that power to whatever you're doing, and hope that it uplifts you in those times when you need to focus on your self-care and collective care to build and strengthen yourself to move forward. So I just want to thank each and every one of you who are in this fight.
Co-facilitating on Zoom is really weird. So this is where Carla and I say, do we pause longer? Quiet's good. We also committed to ending at 2:30, and that seems really important. Okay. So one of the few beautiful things, maybe many beautiful things to come out of this horrible time is learning new ways to connect. This could be an emotive space is really new for me. And that in our doing the book, the number of times that we all shared tears and a kind of depth of love has been really beautiful. And so that is a gift for us, that we can continue to meet like this in this dimension. So let's do it again, whether it's, some kind of public thing or we just gather, right? I don't know, Carla, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll just jump on that and say thank you all for being here, particularly the people who showed up with their time and just listened. I really appreciate that. I know we all do. People often ask where their hope lies, and for me, I'm more interested in the word trust. And this just reminds me again that I can trust that folks show up for each other in the most beautiful, dynamic, loving, caring ways. That's, to me, the heart of mutual aid and solidarity. And thank you all for sharing your stories and your struggles. And as Clea said, please take care. It's a lot of work. I'm interested in more conversations in any way. Reach out. Lots of love and solidarity.